All right, so what is up, you guys? Sage here, Economic History and Why You Should Care, Part 3. So, this is specifically South African economic history, as you may have discovered by this point. Hence, the flag is in the title. What we have discussed thus far is the Cold War ending. By the way, this is nicotine gum. It stimulates the brain. Just word from the wise, don't chew it over and over again too much. You get lightheaded, stomach, whatever, nausea, like the whole nine. So it's not for the weak. And but nicotine itself is actually a pretty good stimulant. Um, but smoking is very much bad for you. But in terms of nicotine, it's neuroprotective. It stimulates your brain, etc. So um, it's in the same category of things such as like Adderall, those types of stuff. So I'm trying not to chew it the whole time. That's why I'm putting it on the side of my mouth. So I think not the front, the side. Okay. But basically, what we've covered is how the Cold War and the ending of the Cold War was not the direct cause of the ending of apartheid, but the things that happened around that time politically on both sides affected South Africa politically on both sides, or affected the civil war that was busy going on both sides. And after that, we covered understanding the American capitalist system, how it has worked, and what kind of troubles it has caused for the Americans. However, at that particular time, they were coming off of a high of basically winning the Cold War, and they were presenting puffed up numbers, as well as threatening the South Africans with a reduced further support if the ANC had chosen the socialist route rather than the is it neoliberalism, capitalist system. Uh, and then from there, during chapters 3, 4, we covered the history of the economic history of South Africa in terms of specifically what has it been here, how it has always been sort of an exploitative in nature, especially towards the majority, which are part and parcel black people have been mostly affected, and those happen to be the poorest of the poor today. And so the main takeaway that we took from the last thing we talked about is the screw job that happened, where basically a compromise was made where instead of compensating the majority that have been affected by this throughout the entire history, like centuries of not just oppression but of exploitation, exploiting cheap black labor, etc. Instead of repaying the people, instead of there being redistribution of funds, of land, etc., there was a compromise, and the ANC chose to create a black elite at the expense of these people, in fact. So the income of the top 10% of black people increased significantly, and those became your Mutsepes, your Ramaphosa's, etc. The income of the bottom 50% decreased and continues to do so across time. And so effectively, yes, there was an essential selling out, or there was a compromise that was made at that time. And even after the fact, the funds are being plundered and used in certain ways. BE was used in certain ways that empowered the already top 10%, and they were the previously disadvantaged, and the companies that were responsible for the MEC, the mine energy complex, were essentially alleviated of their crimes. They got to move their main offices offshore, and they are now beyond the law. So in chapter 5, we talk about affirmative action and the rapid Africanization of bureaucracy. In a nutshell, we're talking about the unfree black labor that has historically been the case. When South Africa moves to a capitalist system, weakens up borders, etc., this ends up furthering the poverty of the bottom 50% because there is even cheaper black labor that is being imported, and so it creates perpetual joblessness, which makes it quite a hopeless situation that the poor have been put in, and the laws continue to put them in terms of these situations where a social grant is now only a buffer between between those people essentially and them, like civil war, like them going out due to like famine, the little very poor services that they get for health are just the tiniest layer so that the elites can maintain their position is essentially what was achieved by that. And across the board, in terms of this affirmative action, it has been mostly to those people, and what ends up happening is it now puts the ANC in a position where they have put these people in position, and what they chose to do with this BE affirmative action, etc., is instead of increasing the value of the infrastructure, making sure their education levels went up across the board, etc., so that there were qualified black people to get into these positions. They just took who was there, and due to law, due to you need to have this many black people in certain positions, etc., you find that at the highest echelon of business of these companies, etc., it is still majority the white people that were there to begin with. There is a few of these black elites who have joined that, and then all throughout, especially in government, that second third layer, it is mostly unqualified black individuals, and it creates a situation where you can't even now question these people. You can't push back without having a racial card thrown at you, without having like those types of things. And so it's not very good for the development of the country in general, due to the fact that if we can't hold each other accountable, if we can't hold each other to a certain standard, then the services, especially in that government side of things, the services are not going to be of a certain standard. Funds are going to be mismanaged, they are mismanaged, etc. And the people who pay for it the most are the very people who are supposed to be compensated, who are the very people who have been suffering from the get go, which is that bottom 50%, and it so happens to be black, due to the black people are the majority in South Africa, and so there are a few percent of those people that are colored. Very very few are Indian, Pakistani, etc., and it's mostly black people in the bottom 25 million of incomes who are suffering, and these are the people who are supposed to be compensated instead of there being a creation of the black elite. And so even the services that they're supposed to be getting are not that good, and will continue to deteriorate as long as it is not addressed that one must be qualified. They failed to address and refuse to address. And if you look across the board, even today, in terms of school attendance, etc., number one is the qualification of the teachers that are in those township schools, etc., and it is the school attendance within those schools, the morals, attitudes, lack of ambition coming out of those places really makes it quite a dire situation. And then I'll finish with the last sentence or so, which is the proportion of working age population with a degree or higher by race increased to from 1993 until 2008 as follows: Africans from 0.5% to 1.5, coloreds from 0.5% to 2.7, Indians from 6.7% to 5.5%, and whites from 14.2% to 19.6. From this point of view of human capital formation, the outcomes of the educational system are a matter of concern. And then in chapter 6 is the entrenchment and intensification of South Africa's social problems, the poverty, the PUI problem, the poverty, unemployment, and inequality problem. So let's hit this first sentence and then we'll skip ahead and I'll give my thoughts. All the social evils attached to the abject poverty, structural unemployment, and growing inequality negatively affects more or less the same section of the South African population, the poorest 25 million, of whom 95% are African and 5% are colored. Interaction between poverty, unemployment, and inequality only entrenches and aggravates people's predicament, but also intensifies the burden of their deprivation. And so here we talk about the times that have led to things being this way. Of course, the exploitative nature, the relocation of people moving from wherever they are across time into squatter camps where violence, drug use are running rampant. The HIV pandemics, all that kind of stuff is running rampant in such places. And on paper, there's how can I say a crutch that is being used by the government, which is if these people are living off these social grants, whatever they pull together, they're living in these houses and the numbers that they're living, then the standard of living can be at a certain point they can have like 10,000 to split among themselves, whatever. But what ends up happening in reality is there is an infighting on, because mind you, we talked about the American capitalism being introduced and the mindset that they first hypnotized their own people with in terms of consumerism, and that they sent to the Western Europe. And that's when we talk about these Western countries, that's what we're talking about. And South Africa can be considered like a westernized country, but with a third world background, not because we are a third class country with third class infrastructure, but due to the way the system has been set up, especially to move more towards, I wanted to touch on this last video, to move more towards exportation than building, meaning jobs are not being created. They're, the focus is not to create companies that are going to employ the people who are unemployed, but rather the resources are being used to create plants that are going to export minerals mostly to your Brazil, Russia, India, China. And the tough thing about that, and the thing that I wanted to mention was, is that the price we're paying to justify that S being at the end of BRICS? Because the way it is looking, or let's just look at the numbers. And I may get these wrong, but it's something ridiculous like this, where South Africa has a fifth of the Russian GDP, maybe a tenth of the Chinese. It's something like a 15th, something like that, of the Indian, and the Brazilian is also something ridiculous like that. So in terms of the GDPs of the countries that are in that alliance, we are not justifiably in there, and the only sort of value that we are providing to these countries is that heavy exportation. I mean, if you talk about the fact that there was load shedding here, and during that time we were still exporting coal. I can I repeat that? The country is the country's companies are experiencing a shortage of electricity, which is generated by coal. And in that same time, there were bills being passed by your upper echelon, the black elite, and we talk again about those blurred lines between government and the corporate, because the Ramaphosa's are, I think his brother-in-law is Patrice Motsepe. There's another guy who's involved in all different types of the mineral energy complex. Like, so that there are entire cahoots and things happening there that lead to these types of decisions being made. But ultimately, if you just look at the picture as it is not looking good. It is looking very dire in terms of not only are the people living this way and the gap between the rich and the poor intensifying over time, but also if you look at the people in power and the perpetuation of the cycles that were already there all throughout the time of South Africa, what's happening with the borders weakening, etc. And I think in understanding this, we kind of understand that our frustrations would be poorly aimed if we were to aim them only at, say, hey, the whites must pay and this and that. Now I say that while also bearing in mind that the last thing I want to touch on is the relationship between the rich and the poor, the relationship between the inequality, is that we stand now in a place where, actually, there's a line that I wanted to touch on here. We stand now in a place where the inequality gap between the very rich and the very poor in South Africa is so monstrously big that it is necessary to reflect on the luxurious and extravagant lifestyle that many different rich permit themselves in comparison to the lifestyle of the very poor are doomed to. When the conspicuous consumption and wastefulness, greediness, and arrogance of the very rich are judged against the misery and deprivation of so many poor people, then we have no alternative but to be shocked at the vulgarity and the repulsiveness of the lifestyle of the rich. Are the rich and the poor really citizens of the same South Africa? Is it not time to bring about a codesa on why so many people are so excessively too rich and why even more people are so hopelessly poor? And then he goes on to touch that the churches played a strategic role in the struggle against apartheid. Why are the churches not conducting an open war on behalf of those that are undeservedly poor against those that are undeservedly rich? When he talks about that undeservedly part, it is the people who are so direly poor are not that way as a result of their competence or lack thereof. And same can be said going across the board to the very rich, the elite, are not that way due to their a certain knowledge or skill that they may have, and they falsely convince themselves of this. But the truth is, it is systematic. Um, I understand that, and this is across the board as well, because we've talked about how the Americas are affected by these issues as well as the Western countries, which is the number one predictor. And I learned this outside of learning about the economic history, etc. This is me myself and my self education on business, etc. 17 books deep. I'm currently doing a consulting company. Constantly learning, all that stuff. Is that the number one predictor of success is not who you are, it's not your skill level, it's not even IQ, it's none of those things. The number one predictor of success is your zip code, is where you live. And so I think it is in understanding that. Now that's from an American source, again, my business studies. But we come back and we apply it to this, we can sort of understand how at this stage of the game there is a very much um, unfair system that is being propagated, and it continues to be so. And so a Codessa would be a sit down in which, again, a Codessa 2.0, where we kind of address, like, okay, guys, it's been 30 years. We understand that Nelson Mandela, Oppenheimer had the meetings, and we call them secret meetings, not because it is a secret that they happened, but it is a secret what was being discussed. So those meetings happened. There were meetings between the US, the NP, and the ANC. It's about time that we look at the results. We're not going to sit here and speculate about what happened where, who did what, but we do have to be brutally honest with ourselves about the results of whatever conversations you had. And it's time to address where we are at now, what has happened, and a way to move forward. And that's pretty much the end of that. We are going to have a part 4 in which we start with chapter 7 and we finish the book. It only has 8 chapters, which is the fairy tale optimism of the national deployment plan versus the likelihood that the PUI system will be perpetuated. Which is around 2012. There were promises made. I think at this point we can say that uh, they have not been kept, and so the fairy tale is not looking like it it will come to fruition at all. Um, oh yeah, and that's pretty much the end of the book. So there were actually 7 chapters. Let me touch on the last sentence here, which is, oh yeah, there is, it is what went wrong in the process of transformation. Okay, yeah, we'll touch on that at a later stage. Yeah, right now I think it's very important to understand these things. My last video, after the first couple of days it was posted up, it only had, I think I was the only one who had seen it. I because I'd reviewed it. Um, and I was still in the process of reading and was going to make this video that I'm putting out today, which is, I think it's the 4th of December. It's Wednesday. The reason is that I think it's very important that we understand these things. I think it's very important that these things are said. It's very important that these ideas are shared, are discussed. And so I believe that when large groups of people, or not necessarily large groups, there's just a couple of us here, for example, but these are things that need to be understood and need to be well understood across the board. That for zip code to be the number one predictor of your income, it means there's something wrong fundamentally with the system that we are living under. And there are changes that are necessary. There are changes that need to be made. And so, if sharing this information, if talking about this, if this open discussion with genuine information, not us just presuming certain things just because of the way things are, but historically understanding why they are the way they are, is a good start. And from this place, hopefully we can get the information far and wide enough and take action in ourselves in forming solutions. I believe it is up to us. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'm dedicating my life to growing businesses across the continent of Africa, but starting in South Africa, because historically no one has been for Africa, or rather, from the point of colonization, there's always been an extractive nature to the relationship between South Africa, Africa, and the rest of the world. Everyone has always been trying to take something from us. And even in seeing now the result of the struggle itself, yes, was for us and was our people standing up for us. But the compromise that was made results in sort of an understanding that even the people that were for us eventually abandoned us. And so it is up to us, it's up to you and me to find ways to solve these problems. And that's through us educating ourselves, and that's through us building networks, connecting, coming together, and making those solutions a reality, one day at a time. It is beyond the scope of this video to cover everything that was in this book, but there's a lot more. It's Lost in Transformation by Saint Peter Blanche. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot that was uncovered there, and there's a lot still more to learn. I said this a while back in the beginning of this entire journey before I knew exactly what I was talking about. I said, they're going to have to kill me. Africa will be liberated. Now, a lot of people, and I understand why I was misinterpreted. I was wearing camouflage. I promise you that it had just so happened that I was wearing that t-shirt that day, but my words were true. And I don't, like I said, and I will continue saying, politics are not going to solve our problems. Economics are. And these are the steps that we have to take in order to begin liberating Africa. It's my first understanding so that the minds can be free, and then continuing to learn. I said there as well in that previous video, I did not know. I now know, and there's still so much yet to learn, and I still believe that to be true. That there are certain things I didn't know that I've learned here and that I'm learning with you. I now know them, and there's still so much to learn in order to become who I need to be to play my part in the liberation of this great continent. In the liberation of this great continent. I believe it is our duty. I believe that freedom is our God given right. However, we need to understand exactly what that means for us as a continent, because, say, it's been about 400 years, 400 odd years since the beginning of colonialism. And since then, we have not understood what that is exactly. And we need to not just look at the past, but now that we're here at this place, knowing what we know now, what can we accomplish? What can we do? And trying to form for ourselves what freedom looks like, because we don't know. They were working towards it. Secret meetings were had, conversations were had, and compromises were made. And so, truly, we have not understood freedom. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but we know there's something to work towards. And I urge each of us to find ways to play our part in creating such freedoms. I thank you. Thank you for watching. If you do want to support a brother in his cause, then please do hit that subscribe button. I've been Sage. Thank you again for watching. Signing out.